Episode 1, The First Step into Stillness. I wasn't supposed to be here. The GPS had gone dead miles back, and the last road sign I passed was so rusted it could have belonged to another century. But there it was, a town, perfectly still, bathed in the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. Every door was open. I stepped onto the main street, my shoes crunching over a scatter of autumn leaves that looked freshly fallen, though the trees were bare. To my left, a diner stood with its door ajar, the bell above it swaying gently as if someone had just walked through. I pushed it open. That's when I smelled it. Steak, grilled to perfection, mashed potatoes with butter melting into golden pools, fresh bread, the crust still crisp. Every table was set, forks and knives neatly aligned, plates full, steam curled lazily from the food, as if dinner had been served just seconds ago. But there was no one. I called out, half expecting some shy old waitress to appear from the kitchen. Instead, the silence pressed in heavier, like the whole building was holding its breath. Then I heard a faint clink of silverware coming from the far corner. I turned. The table was set for two. One plate was untouched. The other had a steak with a single bite missing. A fork lay across the plate, still quivering. I didn't move. Somewhere above me, a ceiling fan rotated with a slow, steady rhythm, casting long, lazy shadows across the floor. And then, from somewhere deeper in the diner, a sound of chair legs scraping against the tile. I walked toward it, every step feeling heavier than the last. The kitchen door was swinging back and forth, as if someone had just passed through. I pushed it open and frownsy. Pot simmered on the stove. A pie cooled on the counter. The air was warm, alive, and on the wall, a clock. It read 3:17. The second hand didn't move. I reached out to touch it, and the instant my fingers brushed the glass, the second hand jerked forward. A breath, hot and deliberate, touched the back of my neck. I spun around. The kitchen was empty, but the swinging door was moving again, this time toward me. Episode 2, The Coffee That Was Still Warm. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. After leaving the diner, I wandered the empty streets like a trespasser in someone else's dream. The silence here wasn't just quiet, it was listening. At the far end of the street, I saw it. A small coffee shop with a striped awning swaying in the night breeze. The windows glowed faintly, like the last breath of a candle. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roasted beans and vanilla syrup. Tables were neatly set, chairs tucked in. A chalkboard on the wall read today's special. Pumpkin-lath handwriting so fresh it could smudge if I touched it. That's when I saw it. A mug Saturday alone on the counter. Steam curled from it in delicate spirals, the kind you see for only a minute before it fades. I picked it up, hesitating, and the warmth seeped into my palm. It was hot. I looked around. No barista, no customers, just the soft hum of a refrigerator in the back. I took a sip. Sweet, strong, perfect. Whoever had made this had done it minutes ago. A small note lay beside the mug. 4 words, written in looping ink. Back in 5 minutes. I don't know why, but my chest tightened. The paper was yellowed at the edges, brittle. It had been sitting here a long time, years, maybe decades. The air shifted. Behind me, the bell over the door jingled softly. I turned, but no one was there, and then footsteps, low, measured, coming from the hallway behind the counter. I leaned over to look, but the hallway seemed darker than it should be, like the shadows were swallowing the light. The footsteps stopped. Coffee's on the house. A voice whispered. It was so close. I could feel the vibration in the air. I dropped the mug. It shattered, splashing hot liquid across the floor. When I looked back up, the hallway was empty, but on the counter, the mug was whole again. Full, still steaming. Episode 3, Footsteps in the Flour. By the third day, I had stopped trying to convince myself this was just an abandoned town. Abandoned towns don't smell like fresh bread. The scent hit me halfway down a side street. Warm and sweet, with a hint of cinnamon. It pulled me like a hook through the fog until I found the source, a bakery. Its windows fogged with steam, a golden light spilling out into the empty street. The door was unlocked. Inside, the heat wrapped around me like a blanket. Loaves of bread cooled on racks, their crusts crackling softly. Behind the glass counter, rows of pastries gleamed under the warm lights, each more perfect than the last. But it was the floor that frowned me. A thin layer of white flour dusted every inch of the tiles, and across it, footprints. Not just any footprints, bare feet. Small, almost childlike. They started from the middle of the room, not the door, and led toward the entrance, but backwards, as if someone had been walking away from something inside. I followed them. They stopped at the door. Outside, the flour trail ended abruptly, as if the person had vanished into the air. I stepped back inside, uneasy, and that's when I noticed another set of footprints, this much larger, leading toward the counter. They hadn't been there before. A sound came from the kitchen, a soft thump, then the scrape of metal on wood. I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I pushed open the swing door to the back. The kitchen was alive with activity. Mixers humming, ovens glowing, dough rising under linen cloths. But there was no one there. Then the air shifted. Flour fell from the ceiling like snow, drifting lazily down in front of me. I tilted my head back, and for a split second, I saw thin bare feet dangling above me in the shadows, toes twitching slowly. I stumbled back, heart slanting in my chest. When I looked again, they were gone, but in the flour on the floor, new footprints had appeared. This time, they were behind me. Episode 4, The Frowning Clock. I'd been seeing it everywhere. 317, on receipts left in dusty cash registers, on a newspaper abandoned in a barber shop, on the timer of a microwave in someone's kitchen. It was the only time the clocks here seemed to know. That morning, the fog had thinned enough for me to see the old courthouse at the center of town. Its clock tower loomed above everything else. The hands fixed stubbornly at you guessed it. 317. I pushed the heavy doors open. Inside, sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the dust floating in the air. The silence was so thick it almost rang in my ears. Wooden benches Saturday in perfect rows, as if court had adjourned only moments ago. Papers littered the floor, court transcripts, stamped with the date, November 4th, 3:17 p.m. At the far end of the room stood a grandfather clock. It was beautiful, carved from dark oak, its face framed in delicate brass. And like every other clock in this cursed place, it was frowning. I don't know why I did it, but I stepped closer and reached out. My fingers brushed the glass over its hands, and the cold jolted through me like ice water. The second hand twitched. Then tick. The sound exploded in the stillness, echoing off the walls. Another tick followed, then another, faster now, as the clock's pendulum began to swing with a deep, resonant thunk, thunk, thunk. The air in the room grew heavy, warmer. Somewhere above me, in the rafters, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing directly over my head. The boards creaked under each step, sending tiny vibrations down the walls. Who's there? I called, my voice breaking the stillness like a snap bomb. The footsteps stopped. A whisper slid down from the ceiling, low and rasping, curling into my ear as if the speaker was inches away. You weren't supposed to touch it. I stumbled back toward the door. The grandfather clock's pendulum stopped abruptly, freezing mid-swing. Its hands jumped once forward, landing again on 3:17, and from somewhere deep inside the courthouse, a second clock began ticking. Episode 5, Dinner for Two. I told myself I wouldn't go into another house. I lied. The sun was bleeding into the horizon when I found it, a small white home with lace curtains swaying in the open windows. The smell hit me first. Roasted chicken, rosemary, something buttery. It was the smell of family dinners, of warmth. But here, warmth meant danger. I stepped inside. The hallway opened into a dining room glowing in amber candlelight. A table Saturday in the center, set for two. The plates were full, chicken carved into perfect slices. Mashed potatoes swirled like clouds. Wine glasses half filled with deep red. The candles flickered, though there was no draft. And then, the chair across from me scraped back. It moved slowly, the wood legs groaning against the floor, until it Saturday perfectly pulled out. Waiting, I didn't sit. My heart pounded in my throat, my skin prickling, but the smell of invitation was pulling me in. I could almost feel the heat from the food on my face. Then the wine glass opposite me lifted off the table. It rose halfway to the air, tilting slightly, as if an unseen hand was considering a toast. And in the crystal, I saw movement on my reflection, but the faint shape of another face, blurred and flickering like static. A woman's voice whispered from nowhere and everywhere at once. "We've been waiting for you." The chicken on my plate twitched. Not slid, not roll twitched, like muscle under skin. My stomach turned. I backed toward the hallway, but the chair that had pulled out now scraped forward sharply, blocking my path. The wine glass dropped back to the table without spilling a drop. The candles burned higher, their flames bending toward me. I ran out the door, down the street, not stopping until the White House was swallowed by the fog. But when I finally dared to look down at my hands, I saw it grease from the chicken smeared across my fingertips. I hadn't touched a thing. Episode 6, The Playground Without Children. I walked the same for blocks, so many times. I was starting to think the town was looping around me, but that night, I found somewhere I hadn't seen before. A playground. It's Saturday in the middle of a small park, the kind you'd expect to hear filled with laughter and squeals. But here, the silence was suffocating. The swings swayed in perfect rhythm, forward and back without a single gust of wind. The slide glittered with dew, as if the air itself was holding on to something. The merry-go-round turned slowly, groaning against rusted bolts, and then I heard each other's laughter. It was faint at first, like an echo trapped in a bottle. I turned, searching, but there was no one. The sound grew louder, sharper, until I could almost place where it was coming from. The sandbox. I stepped closer. The sand was fresh, smooth except for a single small handprint pressed deep into the center. As I stared at it, grains of sand began to spill upward, as if gravity had flipped inside out. Then the laughter stopped. A whisper, high and sing-song, floated into my ear. "Do you want to play?" The swing nearest to me jolted to a stop, the chains rattling violently. The merry-go-round spun faster, the blur of painted horses twisting into something almost human. Shadows danced across the ground, small figures, darting and spinning, even though nothing was there. The sandbox shifted. I swear I saw tiny fingers curl up from underneath, clutching at the air before sinking back into the sand. My legs moved before my brain caught up. I turned and ran toward the park gate, the gravel crunching under my feet. But halfway through, the laughter returned, at this time right behind me. When I reached the safety of the street, I glanced back. Every swing was empty. The merry-go-round was still. The sandbox was smooth again. Only one thing had changed. The handprint was gone. Episode 7, The Portraits That Breathe. I was trying to avoid going inside any more buildings, but the storm that rolled in that afternoon left me no choice. The rain came down in heavy sheets, drenching me in seconds. I ran toward the nearest shelter, a tall, Victorian-style house with a wide front porch. Its door was already open, yawning like it had been waiting. The moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me. Old wood, dust, and something else faintly sweet, like perfume that had clung to the air for years. Lightning flashed through tall windows, and that's when I saw them. Portraits. They lined the hallway walls in heavy, gilded frames, men and women, children in Sunday clothes, all staring out with the stiff formality of old family photographs. But something about them felt wrong. I moved closer to Ani, a woman in a dark dress, her eyes a sharp, icy gray. I swear her chest rose slightly, as though she had just taken a breath. I told myself it was a trick of the light, until I heard it, a faint, synchronized inhale. Not loud, not sudden, but the sound of multiple lungs filling the air around me. I frowned, my skin prickled. The next flash of lightning revealed something I hadn't noticed before: condensation on the glass covering the paintings. Like breath, one of the portraits, a little boy, with slicked back hair, had the faintest fog against the glass over his mouth. And when I looked directly at him, his lips parted just enough for the whisper to escape. "Don't turn your back." The lights flickered. In that split second of darkness, I heard the shuffle of frames against the wall. When the light returned, every portrait had shifted. Now, every set of eyes was locked on me. I backed toward the door. My foot caught on the edge of a rug, and I nearly fell. When I looked back up, the woman in the dark dress was leaning forward in her frame, her fingertips pressing against the glass from the inside. The rain outside had stopped, but I didn't leave calmly. Tore through the door and didn't stop running until the house was a shadow behind me. Even now, I swear I can still hear that inhale, and I'm not sure it's mine. Episode 8, The Hotel with One Guest. By now I'd learned something about this town. Every building that still had lights on was a trap. So when I saw the hotel, I should have kept walking. It stood at the end of the street. 4 stories of faded grandeur, with a flickering neon sign that read vacancy in blood red letters. Rain dripped from the awning above the entrance, pooling on the cracked marble steps. The lobby smelled of old polish and faint cigarette smoke. A brass chandelier hung overhead, its crystals swaying gently though there was no breeze. At the reception desk stood a woman in a tailored maroon jacket, hands folded neatly in front of her. "Welcome," she said, her voice like warm honey. Something in me wanted to trust her, until I noticed her eyes. They weren't moving, they weren't alive. The pupils were painted onto porcelain. The woman behind the desk wasn't a woman at all, just a mannequin, its head tilted slightly, mouth frowning mid-smile. I took a step back, but a brass bell on the counter rang sharply on its own. "Room 203, the mannequin said. The key lay in front of me, the tag swaying as if just placed there. Against my better judgment, I took it. The hallway upstairs was dim, carpet muffling my footsteps. Faded floral wallpaper peeled at the edges, revealing layers of older, darker patterns underneath. I reached room 203 and turned the key. Inside, the room was pristine, bed made tight, curtains drawn, a single lamp glowing softly on the nightstand. But what made my skin crawl was the suitcase in the cornered, scuffed leather, with a name tag that had my full name printed on it. I hadn't brought a suitcase. The bathroom door creaked open on its own. Inside, steam fogged the mirror. A voice hummed softly from the shower, slow and off-key. I couldn't move. The curtain parted just enough for a pale hand to curl around the edge. Water dripped from long, thin fingers, and a voice, low and deliberate, slid into my earth. All the lips in the shower never moved. "You're the only guest, and you'll never check out." The lamp went out. Episode 9, the radio that knows my name. The rain had turned the streets into black mirrors, reflecting the hollow buildings around me. I didn't know where I was going, just that I couldn't go back to that hotel. That's when I saw it, a dusty electronics shop, its windows stacked with old TVs and radios from decades past. The door was ajar, and from inside came a faint crackle, like the sound of a record needle scraping vinyl. The shop smelled of rust and Alcyon. Rows of radios lined the shelves, their dials frowning mid-turn. Most were silent. One wasn't. On the far counter, a boxy old set was hissing with static. The speaker crackled, then began to hum. Not music, something closer to breathing. I stepped closer. The static shifted, forming shapes in the sound, and then clear as if someone was standing beside me said my name. Once, slowly, my skin crawled. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice almost lost in the static. The radio replied not in my voice, but in her voice. My mother's, soft, familiar. "Did for 3 years. You're late," it said. I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of transistor radios. They clattered to the floor, but as soon as they hit, every single one clicked on. Down scenes of voices filled the room. Women, children, all speaking at once. They spoke in languages I didn't know, but in each burst of syllables, I could hear my name, woven like a thread. I backed toward the door, heart pounding. That's when the main radio on the counter flared with a high-pitched tone that made my teeth ache. Through the piercing sound came a single sentence. "Turn around." I didn't. I ran out into the rain, the sound chasing me all the way to the corner. But when I stopped, breathless, I realized I was still holding something, an old radio dial, torn clean from its face. It was warm in my hand. Episode 10, the feast that never ends. I hadn't eaten in days. The air was cold. My legs ached, and every breath came out in sharp clouds. I told myself I wouldn't step inside another building, but then I smelled it. Roast meat, garlic, fresh bread still warm from the oven. The scent led me to a narrow alley and a heavy oak door with golden light spilling from its cracks. I pushed it open, and the warmth hit me like a wave. Inside was a dining hall, long and low-ceilinged, lit by down scenes of candles. A single table stretched from one end to the other, covered in plates piled high with food, glazed ham, roasted vegetables, creamy soups, fruits so ripe it glistened. My stomach twisted in on itself. I stepped forward. The nearest plate held a slice of pie, steam still curling from it. I picked up a fork and took a bite. It was perfect, sweet, spiced, almost to perfect. I reached for another piece of bread, but before I could, the plate refilled itself. Not gradually, it was just full again, as if my bite had never happened. I frowned. See, at the far end of the table, a chair scraped back, then another. I couldn't see who sat in them, but the seats indented as though invisible bodies were leaning forward. Knives and forks rose into the air, cutting, scooping, tearing at the food. The sound of chewing filled the room. Wet, eager, I dropped the fork and turned for the door, but the table had grown longer. The doorway was gone. Candles burned brighter, stretching shadows across the walls like claws. A voice spoke from right beside me, low and pleased. "Eat, you'll never be hungry again." The chairs around me scraped closer. The food on the plates pulsed, as if breathing. The pie slice in front of me rose on its own fork, drifting toward my mouth. I clamped my lips shut. That's when I felt its warm press of unseen fingers on my jaw, forcing it open. Episode 11. The church without a priest. The fog had thickened overnight, swallowing the streets until only the tallest shapes stood above it. One of them was the church. Its steeple pierced the gray sky, the cross at its peak barely visible through the mist. The heavy wooden doors were open just enough to let out a faint, rhythmic sound like a voice. I stepped inside. Candles burned along the walls, their flames standing perfectly still, untouched by any breeze. The air smelled of incense, heavy and cloying. Rows of pews stretched ahead, every seat filled. For a moment, my heart lurched. Eddie wasn't alone. Then I saw their faces, or rather, I didn't. Every figure in the pews was blurred, their features smeared as if painted over. A Saturday motionless, hands clasped, heads bowed toward the altar. The voice I heard outside was louder, now calm, steady, preaching a sermon, but the altar was empty. No priest. Still, the words flowed, low and relentless, in a language I couldn't place. My ears strained to catch meaning, but each syllable slid through my mind like oil. I tried to leave. The moment I turned, every head in the pews snapped toward me. The faceless congregation stared, their necks twisting to far, their blurred mouths opening in perfect unison. They didn't speak. They inhaled, long, as low, as if pulling something out of me. The candles flared, their flames bending toward me. The sermon continued, now whispering directly into my ear. "Sit." My legs buckled, forcing me into the nearest pew. A hymn began, soft, sweet, and utterly wrong. The melody clawed at the inside of my skull, each note bending my thoughts until they weren't mine anymore. The faceless figures turned back toward the altar, and for a brief second, I saw a shadow in the shape of a man, standing where the priest should be, its fingers stretching down the aisle like smoke. It pointed at me. The hymn stopped. Episode 12. The dinner invitation. I woke to the sound of paper sliding under my door. For a moment, I forgot where I was in the stale air, and the faint hum of silence reminded me, still in the town that refused to die. The paper was thick, cream-colored, the kind used for formal letters. On the front, in looping handwriting, was my name. Inside, just 6 words. "We've been expecting you tonight." No address, no signature, just a faint scent of rosemary, like the dinners I'd smelled in that White House. When I stepped outside, the fog was thicker than ever, but somehow, I knew exactly where to go. My feet carried me through winding streets I'd never seen, past buildings that seemed to lean closer as I passed. The path ended at a mansion I hadn't noticed before, 3 stories of black stone, every window glowing with a warm, golden light. The front door stood open. Inside, a long hallway led to a grand dining room. A table stretched farther than it should have, laden with food that looked more alive than cooked. Roasted meats glistened as though they'd just been pulled from the fire. Bread steamed in baskets. Fruit dripped with juice. Every chair was filled, but the guests weren't quite there. Their outlines shimmered like reflections on water. Some had faces that flickered between strangers and people I knew. Me mother, a childhood friend, a man I passed on the street years ago. They all turned toward me as one. At the head of the table sat a figure draped in black. Its face was hidden in shadow, but when it spoke, the voice was everywhere at once. "Welcome home." A chair beside it slid back. The guests watched, silent but smiling, their teeth far too white, too perfect. I didn't move. My pulse roared in my ears. The figure in black lifted a hand, and the food on the table pulsed. It literally pulsed like it had a heartbeat. The smells were intoxicating, drawing me forward, despite every instinct screaming to run. Sit, the voice said again, and my body obeyed. Episode 13, The Last Supper. The chair was cold beneath me, every gas gaze pressed in, their flickering phones shimmering more violently, as if my presence had disturbed the fragile skin of reality here. The figure in black at the head of the table leaned forward. You've walked our streets, it said, voice smooth as oil. You've entered our homes. You've eaten our bread. You belong to us now. The food in front of me looked even more grotesque up close. Roast meat that twitched under its glaze, fruit that bled when the knife touched it, bread whose crust cracked like bone. I pushed my plate away. The air in the room thickened, every guest tilting their heads in unison, like marionettes reacting to a tug on the same string. You must eat, the figure said. It's the only way to stay. I don't want to stay, I whispered. Its shadowy hand reached toward me, stretching impossibly far until the fingers wrapped around my wrist. Cold seeped through my skin, into my bones. My vision blurred, and then I saw them. The guests' faces were mine, not just similar, mine, over and over, in every seat, at every age, every version of me that might have been. One looked 20 years older, with eyes that had seen too much. Another was a child, swinging their legs under the chair. All of them stared hungrily. You've been here before, the figure murmured, and you will be here again. My plate refilled itself, steam curling upward in shapes that looked like reaching hands. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't obey. The guests began to eat, their bites synchronized, the sound of chewing growing louder, wetter, until it was all I could hear. One version of messaging directly across smiled, mouth full. It's easier if you don't fight. The figure in black raised a goblet of dark red liquid. To the newest among us, the guests raised theirs in unison. My hand lifted the goblet without my command. The liquid touched my lips, warm, metallic, too thick to be wine, as it slid down my throat. The candles guttered. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was my own seat empty, waiting for the next me to arrive.
Epilogue 3:17. They say time moves differently here. I know now it doesn't move at all. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the main street. The fog was thinner, the air calm. It could have been morning or midnight. Every building stood exactly as I'd first seen it, doors open, food on tables, steam curling lazily into the air. The only thing missing was me. Shops I'd entered before still carried traces of my presence. In the diner, the fork at the corner table still quivered. In the coffee shop, the mug was still warm. In the bakery, the footprints in the flour were fresh. Mine. I walked the streets, calling out. But the town only answered in echoes, my own voice, thrown back at me from places I couldn't see. That's when I saw it, the courthouse clock tower, looming above the roofs. Its hands were moving. Slowly. Painfully slowly. I climbed the steps inside, heart pounding, until I stood beneath the massive clock face. The second hand inched forward until it struck 3:17 and stopped. Somewhere deep inside the walls, I heard it, the scrape of chairs on a wooden floor, the faint clink of silverware, the low murmur of voices. I turned toward the sound, and in the glass of the clock face, I saw them, row after row of figures seated at a long table, all looking up at me. All of them, me. One of them smiled. See you soon. The vision faded, leaving only my reflection in the glass. But behind me, just for a second, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Cold, familiar, and the clock began ticking again.